Forged secretly in mortuary archaeology's hottest furnace, it's Archaeodeath. Welcome, Archaeodeathlings, to my latest Archaeodeath interview. A chance for me to have a chat with someone who knows a lot of stuff about other things and different things. And this week we're talking to online Saraphima Talks. Over to you to introduce yourself. Welcome.
Hello. My name is Saraphima. I have a doctorate of history, and I specialize in folk traditional practices, their evolution and adaptation over time to our modern understanding of witchcraft, occultism, and paganism.
So all the things that we love to learn about online, and at some point I'm going to have to talk about this North American spooky season obsession, which is a whole month's worth, and we are in that zone. Whenever this goes out, we're currently recording in October, which apparently is spooky. I am only late to this thing. It took me, it was only with TikTok that I realized there was a whole month dedicated to this. For me, it's just a couple of days of stuff,
Absolutely.
but
I mean, for me, it's a 365 thing.
well, exactly.
Spooky life.
But it's apposite to be addressing these topics at this type of vague season that can extend to 365 24/7 for you, and for other people a month, and some people a couple of days.
Very apt for the season. Very apt for the season, for sure.
Well, I'm so delighted to have this chat because we've been sort of talking to each other at different points on different things, on mutual areas of interest, and on social media. And I'm just really excited to have a chance to talk to you because you're one of those people that spans academia and various popular dimensions because of the nature of your interests, and also the nature of online communities, which are ever changing, ever challenging. But I wanted to start off by getting a bit more sense of how did you get into all that stuff? How did you become you in that
How did I become me?
Yeah.
Well, ultimately it was an interest in storytelling, which is the same for most historians. Most historians I know, they have a fundamental basis in like storytelling. That's what we love. We love these narratives. We love understanding why. We love the layers of these stories. And so growing up, obviously the fantastical stories absolutely caught my attention. And as a young adult, the Harry Potter books came out. There's lots of media, movies, TV shows. Like, we are constantly inundated with this idea of what is witchcraft.
Yes.
And for me, it left too many blank spaces. And so the kinds of questions that I had, there really was no answer for them. And so when I really started getting into it was probably I've always been a witchcraft practitioner. I've always engaged with the literature, the communities, and everything like that. So when I finally got to like an academic level where I was in these places where I could ask these questions, nobody had answers for me. And I thought, well, how weird is that? This is not only a lifestyle, but a system of thought, magic in general, that has been with us since the dawn of time, really. And how can something that has been so fundamental in the structure of entire cultures, of religious practice, in our answers of the big questions, what is God, where do we go when we die, all of these questions, how can something that monumental be whittled down to something that people scoff at now? Magic, witchcraft, right? And so that's really what got me started on it. And I began with taking classics. I began with taking a lot of those classes that focus on antiquity, and then I realized that there really wasn't anything academically here in far as structure that I could pursue in order to get these answers. And so what ended up happening, and what took definitely quite a bit longer, is I had to really fight for the education that I got. I had to really structure it myself. It took a lot of negotiating with the dean of my school, the dean of the department. It took, a couple professors who really had my back through this whole thing and supported my seeking of knowledge, and also internationally as well, because there were several classes and courses that I needed to take There was one I literally took via correspondence. I wasn't there. I had to go through email. So I would watch these videos of the lecture, do the work, email it back. And all of that needed different levels of approval, right? So
Yeah.
I to do all of the legwork. I had to get the syllabus from these other classes. I had to get permission from those professors overseas in order to, essentially have me in their class without having me in their class. It took negotiations with students from those other schools who would set up their laptops and turn it around so the camera was facing the teacher so I could like be in class at the same time. And then when it finally came down to it, as I was finishing up my degree, I actually literally had no one to argue my dissertation with for over a year. It took over a year to find anybody who could even not only just like speak the language I was speaking, but have an understanding of what I was trying to say. Because obviously, with your dissertation, you have to argue. You have to argue your point. And my point being that it's a fundamental aspect of culture, right? All of this history from the dawn of time to now, all of this magic is so tightly ingrained into our culture and still exists today, in my opinion. So
you have that blessing and curse of global pop culture exposure to stereotypes, serious and less serious, and parodies of the other genres, so much overlapping and interleaving popular culture. But you also have genuine, deep-rooted historical traditions that are not taboo, but are scoffed at as serious scholarship. Is that a fair characterization? Because of that pop culture association, it's the blessing and curse of archaeology, really. At one level, people go, "Oh, everyone likes to be an archaeologist." Yeah, but the stereotypes in popular culture of archaeology are nowhere near what archaeologists do. So it can be it's not the same at all. But it's a the pop notoriety is the word I would use. It can be. It's not always positive. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and stigmatization too, right? I experienced that a lot through my academic career, because while I had, one or two professors, like I said, who really supported me, who really had my back insofar as like my ability to access information, access knowledge, there was also that stigmatization of, well, this is ridiculous. Why would you get a degree in that? And oh, well, she's just, some spooky girl. Definitely a lot of jokes in regards of, oh well, she'll curse you, she'll hex you, and then a lot of tokenization from my own institution, where I was kind of just like this talking point.
So you're a gimmick. You're kind of like, oh look,
I was absolutely a gimmick for a long time. I recently did a video on TikTok responding to one of your videos where I expressed my frustration with that, how my institution as a whole didn't even really take me very seriously, because they kept pairing me up in these public forums, these discussions, whether they were via Zoom or in person, and I was constantly getting paired up with these pseudo historic quacks, arguing about Atlantis and arguing about like this ridiculous nonsense that had nothing to do with my degree, but because of my intersectionality of my degree, I was able to talk on a variety of topics.
I found the real problem with that. I'm not trying to talk over your experiences, which is really important there, but I think I found a broader challenge with that in academia, that anything that's seen as alternative or fringe or unconventional is packaged into the same block. So if anyone who knows your online content, is you've got zero tolerance to these pseudo archaeological grifting conspiracy theories, and yet sadly to many academics they wouldn't dream for a second of lumping a rabbi, a priest or an imam into and just say, oh, more fringe religious beliefs or more fringe spiritualities or whatever. But they are happy to do that with other faiths and spiritualities, if that's the right, I don't know if that's a fair description, but and those that study it, so we're very comfortable in medieval studies, which is my field, to go into conferences, a big international conference, and there'll be a few friars banging around, studying actual medieval Franciscans or whatever, and no one thinks that's a bit weird. That there you got there's actually literally a friar here speaking in a session on. It's not common. I don't want to give the impression, but that interleaving of modern faith and practitioner with the actual study of those institutions, their deep time story, and yet we would bulk at that academically. Not we, but the academy balks at that when it comes to, and that labeling and association can be really pernicious because it actually shuts down, in my view, any possible dialogue with really rich areas of popular and a spiritual engagement, which I'm afraid is increasingly not about the conventional religious structures. So I just find it really bizarre that academics, you do find in 2024 people acting like it's some kind of parody of a 1950s or 1920s sort of snobberies, and I don't know, that's my sense of things. I don't know.
Well, and that snobbery has really existed so long as there has been big academia. I also did a video that had to do with the Egyptomania, right? When Tutankhamun's tomb was found and all of these Egyptian artifacts were coming to England and being poured over, and how a lot of the Magical manuscripts that we had access to, whether it's London, Brooklyn, Ebens, there was plenty of them to go over. It was scoffed at even then. Research of little value. But ultimately, I would argue that it has just as much fundamental value as anything that we are looking at through history, because it covers such a diverse amount of themes. It covers, gender, it covers race, it covers class systems. All of these things can be interpreted through these magical texts. I wrote a couple notes down here, how it developed the understanding of where their worldviews were. It developed what was important, what was vital to them, what kinds of things were they feeling. And that's a huge part, because within archaeology, you can find an artifact and you can pick up this artifact and you can make the assumption that this artifact was important, but you don't know how they're feeling. But through these magical texts, you can know exactly what a person was feeling, because they're trying to hex the shit out of somebody.
So it's about the interleaving of emotions, fears, hates, loves, passions,
elements, all sorts of elements of the human experience and relatable human experiences. Some of the oldest examples of magical practice that we have from Rome are hex tablets, and these hex tablets would come into play against, business partners. They would come into play against ex-lovers. It could come into, all of these different things. And it is reflective of the lack of justice the average person would get during the time of ancient Rome. Unless you were of the upper echelon and the higher classes, you weren't going to get, your day in court, as it were. You were either going to be instantly turned down or believed. And so there's reflections of social norms, social structures like that. Like justice is a huge theme across witchcraft for the entirety of it. And when I say witchcraft, I mean that colloquially in our understanding. I mean, this term really didn't come about until around the 19th century, but it is an umbrella term for any kind of practice that seeks to intentionally influence reality, right? So
efficacious magic. I don't know what the terms are. There's so many different history of religion terms for it. I can't keep up. But
there are a lot of terms.
It's about the agency of things, the ability to enact effect.
It is,
isn't it?
And that's really the primary reflection that we have in magic and magical practices. It's it's an attempt to have that personal agency, which is why we see such emphasis and such importance in people from lower classes to utilize magic. And that's why magic survived through those lower classes for so much longer than it did at the upper elites, because the upper elites, they were already getting everything they needed. But the people down at the bottom of the, flagpole, or bottom of the,
insert
analogy, the
Bottom of
bottom of
the elephant. No, the bookcase. No,
these people at the bottom of society, they weren't seeing justice, and they were living very difficult lives, and the kinds of things that were important to them weren't important to, the upper classes. Not to say that the upper classes didn't have their own versions of, I mean, we see elements of it through the 14th century, 15th, 16th. French courts had actual like magical practitioners and diviners in the court for centuries. So we do see examples of it, but my interest has always really fallen back to, the peasantry, the common
yeah,
man. Why was this important to them? Of all of the things that could be important, why was this important to them? And it was having that element of self-determination. It was, I need some kind of control in my life. And one of the coolest things is from, whatever century you want to say, 12th, 13th century, and that's why somebody is practicing it. The same reason applies today. That is part of the human experience. That's why you see in witchcraft communities, it's usually people that are already kind of like disenfranchised from society, considered other, considered outside. They always gravitate towards witchcraft and occultism, or even just esoteric knowledge, because it gives that sense of personal agency, of self-determination.
yes, yeah.
And it's so fascinating to me.
And you started off by talking about texts that record, but this is no, perhaps that's only, dare I say, by the definition you've just given, only one fragment of this, because by definition, many of these people, it's about oral societies and their use of
Yeah,
substances, materials, and it's very much a, that's a non-textual. Or not saying
yeah,
that
no,
people couldn't read or write at all. I'm just saying that
exactly.
it spans media.
It does, yeah. And so the importance of these oral traditions and how they're reflected and where we can find them reflected is also really fascinating, because in my studies, it hasn't just been like, oh, let's just go find all the magical texts, because there aren't many. However,
Yeah.
we can see reflections of these practices, of the importance of these practices in things like Catholicism.
Mm.
We see it
Mm.
reflected because Catholicism, in order to adapt and assimilate to these different communities and cultures, had to incorporate elements that were recognizable to the average person. And so you can see reflections of these folk traditional practices within Catholicism. Quite a few of my research notes, and when I was working through my final thesis, came from the Spanish Inquisition, because as terrible as they were really good at record keeping, really
Yes.
good at record keeping. Um, and then you see, as you move through the centuries, it's not always just the occult spaces that you need to look at when trying to develop these kinds of occult concepts and how they work into society as a whole. There are so many different avenues that you can take in order to acquire research, to acquire an understanding of this.
So one of the powers of this approach is the ability to look across vast geographical areas and vast chronological periods, which is unsettling to everyone, and but powerful and interesting, and allows that comparative approach. But also, at least maybe in those who perhaps don't read in an academic way about that, they can be led into thinking that means that you're trying to, or there can be a misunderstanding. There's a generic gloss of things are just the same everywhere, and I certainly know that's something you've reacted to and tried to qualify quite a lot in terms of misinformation online, sort of people jumping between continents and across millennia to make analogies and direct parallels and even suggest origins. So how do you have you dealt with that, because it is such an important part to be able to look beyond 14th century southwest France and then 18th century northeast Italy, or whatever it may be, to be able to look across the diaspora of European communities, the interaction with indigenous communities in different ways, the African contribution. There's so much there to tackle it. So it's a really complicated and challenging field, and it's easy, I suppose. I don't know what I'm asking, but I'm just sort of, what do you think? Well, how about
So Okay, so when we're actually in a really interesting part of this history, of this story of witchcraft, occultism, and oh, sorry, dogs out.
Oh,
Um,
there we were dog friendly on Archeo Death. So.
well, he's trying to have a battle, but anyway,
Yeah.
so we're in a really the best part that I usually say about my pursuit and my study is sure the history part of it. I love it. I love it. But it's a living history. People are still practicing today. The way that they approach it, the way that we not only understand it, but the kinds of things and the way that things are changing so rapidly right now with the level of interconnectivity that we have and the discussions that we are having within our societies, like cultural appropriation. That's a massive one
Oh
that
yes.
and no more so than on social media, because we can actually pinpoint the almost the exact time that we started having a really big problem within witchcraft, occultism, and adjacent kinds of spiritualism,
Oh
whether
right.
that's paganism or whatever. And that actually comes from the 80s and 90s. Everything that was coming
Okay.
out in the 80s and 90s, we start seeing a publication boom. In the 70s, companies like Llewellyn start publishing more regularly. We have Weiser's, we have a few other publications that are now starting to release more of these kinds of like witchcraft texts. You get your Cunninghams, your Bucklins, your all of these really what we consider kind of like the granddads of our practice. And the problem that they had was there was no discussion on cultural appropriation. And there was this concept of this omni spiritualism, and that's what I call it now. That's what I've called it in my thesis. That's this omni spiritualism, where anything that could even remotely be considered spiritualism is a-okay to use. Doesn't matter if it's attached to a culture or history. We can divorce it from its culture and history and utilize it in the mainstream. And unfortunately, through the 90s, that mainstream just got worse and worse and worse to our concepts of India was a huge one. Karma, chakras, all of that is completely divorced in our modern Western society from its history and culture of origin. And a lot of these kind of like deities, that's another big one from around the globe. Um, because we had things like the Dianic Wiccans, which were all girl power, um, and they would just co-opt and adopt any kind of female representing deity into their own spirituality, regardless of what significance that deity had within a certain culture. So
It's
you would
just the
have
eternal female power. You
male
know.
power, and they all
Yeah.
kind of like loosely the same, whether it was there's only two modes of this female deity. There was the light female deity and the dark female deity, and that's all you get, and there's no nuance and there's no intersectionality. And that was the norm for decades. For decades. And so really it's my generation, it's the following generations that are having to tease out these cultural significance, reconnect these practices with their histories, their cultures of origins. And we're doing a fairly good job of it with all of our interconnectivity. However, like we've discussed many, many times, social media is a blessing and a curse. In some instances, it really helps propel the practice forward. It really helps the understanding of why we're doing this, what different cultures have influence. I'm grateful for social media because it's gotten me in contact with so many different kinds of practices that I otherwise would not have known about.
Hmm.
Familial practices that have just exclusively been in one family, they can be reflective of much larger conversations about culture and understanding. Um, However, the flip side of it is that you get a lot of people that get very, very angry. You get a lot of people who have very loud and wrong opinions. You have a lot of people who have the ease of access to misinformation, disinformation, and then you also have to skate this really, really thin line. And I think this has been the most difficult part for me on social media is knowing when to say something about it. Because obviously, when we're in these kinds of spiritual like spaces, these unverified personal gnosis kind of spaces, I can't be a person who is telling you, no, you did not experience what you're saying you're experiencing. Despite how wild it is, that's
Yeah.
not my position. I can only attach it to a culture, a history, a much larger story, the overarching tapestry of what is these occult and witchcraft practices that we have. And it's difficult. It's really difficult.
So you can't really, I mean, the polls that I was talking about that are drawing this discussion, I mentioned before, I think are still there in that social media space between the generalist, appropriative, universalist, omni, you know,
Omni-spiritualist,
yeah,
yep.
and you can't put it back into ethnic silos because it's already out of the box. But trying to reconnect,
Mhm.
not to say you can never, if you're trying to be a Lancashire practitioner, you can never take something from Middlesex or Sussex or something.
Yeah, no, and that's generally what we see in online spaces and what has been seen for several decades, going back even to the 50s in regards to approaches to magical practice. I mean, we look at Gerald Gardner, and there's a lot of opinions about Gerald Gardner, but what he did with Wicca was he created a homogenized faith that was based on a European experience.
Yeah.
And so instead of having specific traditions that are Welsh traditions, that are Irish traditions, that are Scottish traditions, et cetera, he homogenized all of these kinds of more traditional, folk traditional practices under the umbrella of Wicca as this European experience. And so a lot of that became the norm, right? And it just got worse and worse and worse to the point that we get to this like omni-spiritualism. You go into a metaphysical shop and you've got Buddhism and you've got
Mm.
Satanism, and you've got, all of these like
Sounds like
crazy,
Glastonbury to me.
yeah, you got all these crazy mismatched ideas and concepts of what is witchcraft, of what is acceptable as witchcraft, and how do we approach these really complex topics, and how do we tell people no?
Well,
That's the hardest part, is like how do you tell people no?
well,
Am I in a position to tell people no?
it's the same type of thing of anybody who's in a position with knowledge of when to guide people and when to, you know, lay down the law. I mean, I face it in classes every week. I was just, I mean, just anecdotally, yesterday I was teaching a class and the student emphatically said something wrong. And I think, well, here we are, the game again. Everyone else has heard it. It's
Mhm.
inaccurate. It's obviously inaccurate. So do I need to say anything? Um, or do I have to just go, well, I think you'll find that it was actually, and they go, oh no, well, no. And I go, you know,
I mean, loud and wrong seem to go hand in hand quite
yeah,
often.
yeah. It's an awkward one, and you're trying to go, well, I think, I'm very wishy-washy most of the time, and sometimes you just have to go, no, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, there's no evidence of that. Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, there wouldn't be because no, you're just trying to find excuses now. You just have to sort of. So it's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult in terms of when you're a teacher, when you're trying to work with, yeah, peers and in different ways, but also when you're in online spaces. So, I mean, I mean, tell me a little bit, please, if you would, about your online presence because you've had problems with TikTok in terms of hacked accounts, and you were a huge creator, and
Yep.
now you've had all sorts of issues with that. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I mean, but what I mean is that you're an established. Doesn't matter how many followers you got, you're an established authority within that space, that a reliable source of informed information. So, what do you feel are the potentials and the pitfalls, or the strengths and the weaknesses, of that position?
So, like most other people, I had engaged loosely with social media before lockdown, right? I was one of those people who were on, Tumblr and MySpace and all of it at the beginning, did the Facebook thing, but never really in any kind of like academic capacity or even under my name. It was, it's usernames and everything like that. So it was kind of more just like a general loose interaction with social media. Then, of course, lockdown happened and we all got online because we had nothing else to do. And when I first joined TikTok specifically, I thought, you know what, that's the reason my username is Saraphima Talks, because I didn't know what I wanted to talk about. I just knew I was going to talk, and I talk a lot. And so when I first joined, I actually didn't engage with any kind of like academics. I didn't share any of my academic knowledge. I didn't engage in any I engaged in witchcraft spaces because I missed those conversations. I missed having that kind of interaction. And so at first it was just sort of like a means of connecting with people, a means of maybe making a few friends and talking about my experience within witchcraft spaces and my experience in engaging with different witchcraft topics. It was never about the academics. And there was two reasons to this. Is one, if you haven't been able to tell, I'm a little bitter about my academic experience. I'm a little bitter. And for the longest time, I truly believed that I never, ever wanted to engage in these kinds of conversations. I was done. I was finished with it. My experience was essentially the worst that it could be, and I had my institution completely like dust their hands off of me when I needed them most, and that was a really difficult time to get through. And when I got through the other end of it, it was like, no, I don't want anything to do with this. I'm never touching it again. I don't want these topics. But I also had the experience of being in both in-person and some online witchcraft spaces where, I would get excited and I would share my knowledge and I was immediately shut down. No, 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 no. That's not what we believe here. Oh, okay. And so that's when you get into that whole discussion is like, when do you correct somebody, or when do you offer information, or when do you say, hey, that's not right? And for the most part, I found that people who are most keenly attached to my area of study, the witches of the world, didn't really want to hear what I had to say. They weren't really interested. They just wanted their own interpretation and how it benefited them. And that was my worldview for a very long time. And it wasn't until probably a year or two after I joined, I did this little segment on notable figures from witchcraft history, right? And I talked about all the good ones, all the crazies. I got my Aleister Crowleys, I've got my Samuel McGregor Mathers, and all of these wild characters that are so interesting to delve into. And so many people started reaching out and going, "Oh man, I didn't know that. That's so cool. Are you going to do more? Are you going to talk about this more?" And so then it was like, okay, yeah, no, I do have some more. So it was a very slow progression into where I am now, and being able to find joy and find love in the things that I spent so long studying that I felt truly like I had just like given up on. And it's only in the past year that I've really like deliberately switched my content into that academic space and engaging with other academics.
It's really difficult, the two things, and I think you I don't know if you'll see the same way that I do, but I see it's the one thing of I know stuff and who wants to hear it. And actually I still keep a lot back, and I don't share a lot of things I'm actually working on or actually interested, for fear of drama or fear of derision and things like that. And then there's the actual working with other academics, because frankly other academics are the reason why I just have given up with all. I broadcast on other social media platforms. I don't have conversations because no one is interested in me. I'm too well known, and I'm not well known enough to, so I'm not a celebrity, and yet equally people know me in my field. So it's a weird sort of space where I don't feel very comfortable. So actually, yes, I agree with you. It's actually through the TikTok experience I've tried to actually have these conversations. But it's still is slow in coming in terms of how to do it and working out where people when you say no, that's not right, and or well, that's interesting, but here's something else, and it's just because the other problem is every time I say something, my credentials are used against me, because you can suddenly, or you're being used against other people. He said you're wrong. Well, it wasn't about being wrong. It was about just adding something, and then suddenly you've realised there's a whole war of 50 creators all sending each other DMs and doing stitches of, and you're going, oh no, that's not what I was doing at all. And it can really get out of hand very quickly, can't it? And these
overnight it can go from like a mild disagreement over something to literally dangerous situations, which I have experienced. As you mentioned, I used to have a much larger account. Unfortunately, I've lost access to that one, had to start using my backup account. And it's frustrating because you put a lot of energy, you put a lot of work, you want to be able to like continue sharing. And ultimately, what it comes down to is there are always going to be people who don't want to learn, and there's always going to be people who don't want to listen. The only voice they want to hear is their own. And for people like you and me, who are not only academics but stubborn,
I deny everything.
It can get a little tense at times. And I've had some interpersonal relationships through the app that have been wonderful, that I've really enjoyed, that these are people that I've given access to me like off of the app, and that I would consider friends. And then there's some people who just can't stand the sight of me, like on site, loathe my guts. And it's like, I don't know you.
How do they know? I mean, I remember one of my first experiences that really hit home was when I was at a bookstall at an academic conference years ago. I've only ever done, people know me, I've only ever done one monograph. I've done lots of edited collections and papers and journal book chapters. I only did one monograph. My monograph had come out, and then there was another monograph by a doctoral researcher at another university, junior to me, who came out a year later on a comparable theme. And they're actually very different books, but and I just overheard someone saying, I'm just looking at this book, really rips into Howard Williams's work. And someone was like, yeah, good. And I was just saying, oh. I mean, I didn't know I didn't know it did. I don't think it did. But in their mind, it was like, yeah, this sticks it to that upstart, and it was just like, whoa, people. Well, it's good that people care, but I don't know. It's occasionally I hear reactions like that, and him, and there's a whole group of Twitterati who in the archaeological community in Canada, US, and Britain, who I am like, my name is like, they just can't stand that I'm there. But what can you do? I can't convince it, because the few times I've actually tried, I sort of said directly, can I just address this issue with you? And it's like they immediately go onto Twitter. He's been in touch with me, bullying me, trying to threaten me. And I go, right, I thought, okay. And then within 2 hours, it's Annie tried to get me sacked, and I'm going, hang on, I was caught challenging. I was just emailing you to say that this is wrong, what you said. I didn't do anything, and then before you know it, it's escalated into something worse, and there's just no talking at all. It's like something out of a Monty Python movie, or some kind of ridiculous comedic misunderstandings, and you just go, oh, right, there's nothing to be said.
You probably have it quite a bit more difficult than I do. I was super careful for a variety of reasons, but I was super careful about not attaching, my legal last name. Like my first name, fine, whatever, but my legal last name to any of my social media. Nor did I attach any of my academic accolade, nor did I attach the institutions that I was either attending or working with or anything like that. Because at the time, like, my safety was absolutely paramount. But it's a blessing and a curse, because for you get people who literally will email the school. I don't like what he said online, or he was really mean to me in a comment section.
I've had a few of them, yeah.
Where actual institutions getting contacted over TikTok. And I mean, it's a blessing and a curse for me, because it also means that I can't, share a lot of my published research. I can't share projects that I've been working on or that I've previously worked on or that have gotten published into different volumes. I can't associate any of my previous writing. A lot of my previous writing on witchcraft topics and witchcraft history have gone under ghostwriting with one of the publishers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Usually what they do, this particular publisher, and I don't know if I
No,
know that
just
I found a non-disclosure at some point. What it said, I'm not sure. However, what they typically do is they'll get people who kind of specialize or are known for certain kinds of areas, and they bunch them together and call it one volume by one person. So out of this publishing,
oh.
if you read anything that has like a history section in it, it was me.
I've never done any of that. I've actually played around with pseudonyms. I've got my pseudonyms lined up. Like but I won't say them all. But I'll never use them. But I want to be various names named after various features on archaeological monuments. So if I was going to do prehistoric writing, I'd be Dr. Aubrey Holes after Stonehenge and the Aubrey Holes at Stonehenge, and various.
I was going to do the same thing. I was going to do the same thing, actually, and I was going to be Saraphima Voynich, which is the Voynich manuscript, the
Yes.
ancient. That was the one I was going to. I might still use it. I don't know. But it is absolutely paramount for a lot of people to be able to protect their privacy. But there's blessings and curses with that as well. I'm grateful because I've seen other people get doxxed. I've seen other people's employers be contacted. I've seen other people's families be contacted. And I thus far, fingers crossed, knock on every bit of wood that I can, I have not experienced that yet, but there have been people who have tried.
There's a female presenting person online issue. There's the community itself turning on each other. Are you also referring to particularly fundamentalist religious groups targeting
that was my first account went down because the West Row Baptist Church found it.
Okay.
They scare the bejesus out of me. They do, truly
scare everyone, I think. Yeah.
So yeah, it's religious groups. It's members within the occult community who want to continue, grifting and pandering to an audience that doesn't know any better. And then I rock up and say, well, if you look at this particular, example or whatever it may be, and then then I'm public enemy number one. And as you have seen, a lot of these kinds of bigger creators, they can have cult-like followings. Followings are weaponized almost instantaneously. That's why things can change so drastically overnight, because all it takes is one person making one video that's, calling you out or whatever it may be. And suddenly your entire comment section is flooded with the most heinous, hateful things that you could possibly imagine.
It seems to me, and please correct me if this comes across wrong, but while there are genuine, deeply seated structural inequalities in intersectional identities, there is not one that a group of people will not weaponize to justify being shitty to people. So who do we know who's they're in the wheelchair, right? You're attacking them. Well, I don't even know who that is. You definitely were. And so I'm going to defend. And then before you know it, there's everyone's going, yeah. And you know what he said to that person in a wheelchair? And you're going, oh, well, who is this? or whatever it is. And before you know it, that the outrage has been farmed, and the crop is just. There's no fighting it. It's just like we're talking about a detailed academic subject, and now I'm literally taking a baseball bat to people in wheelchairs based on something. I'm making this up, by the way. I didn't just get the rumors. I've always, some of my best friends are in wheelchairs. But it's that kind of that outrage that you can't control. It's utterly unpredictable.
And that seems to be the default setting. People want to be outraged because the outrage is what we've been programmed to think is entertainment. Right? You think of talk shows, reality TV shows, magazine covers, entertainment shows. All of these things are geared towards normalizing outrage, are geared towards normalizing that kind of behavior as entertainment. It is not entertainment. People should not be getting death threats over not liking the same shade of lipstick as you. Like that's
No.
literally a content creator. Just last week I was scrolling, I don't know who she was I was scrolling through her page, and she said, like, I just didn't like it, guys. It's not that big of a deal. Why are you sending me death threats? And it's like at the drop of a hat, people are able to say, and it's the anonymity, and it's the you're not a person, you're a content creator, or whatever it may be, however they justify it. They will say things to you that no person would ever say to your face,
No.
and no person would ever say anywhere near you, or even say in their everyday lives. It might even be people that, like, for whatever reason, have pent up all of this frustration and rage, and here we go on the internet, have fun, you
Do you
know?
know, I was just thinking about something. Something happened to me last week that was very upsetting, and I only just realised that it was good old fashioned face to face being absolutely horrible to me. And I realised I haven't had that for a long time, because you know, it was actually someone sitting opposite me saying one of the most horrible things I've ever heard said to me to my face with a smile. Of course they were an
Oh,
academic. Of course they were an academic. And and
they were.
and and I just went, no, that's not the way it is. But it was utterly personal things said in the pub, and I was just like, and I thought, do you know, that's quite fun actually. It's quite a novelty. You know,
It's refreshing, at least, you know, at least they stuck by their guns. Yeah, and I think that that's, I mean, trust me, over the years, especially in academic, nobody smells blood in the water quite like an academic.
no, no,
Like the second they think that you're down, the second they think that there's something, you know, some of the worst things that have been said to me, definitely from other academics, but also religious types have said horrible, horrible things to my face.
because they
You
have
know,
the godly or the
they
whatever.
have they have the backing of Jesus or
Yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah, yeah. Just
Um, you know,
I'll pray for you as I stab you in the neck. You know, whatever it is.
and just heinous, horrible things have been said to me in public. Because I mean, even during my academic career, the assumption was always, oh, well, she's a practicing witch. She's a practicing witch. Even when I never admitted to it, even when I only ever came at it from an academic approach, and wanted to really, at the time, I was really trying to break away from that idea that, oh, well, she's only learning this because she's, you know, or whatever it may be. But I was really trying to break away from that, but it didn't matter. I mean, these religious groups still found me. These dude bros still found me. The conspiracy, you know, the conspiracy dude bros. I remember sitting in a conference while this absolutely insane man was ranting about some sort of conspiracy theory, and that, you know, archaeological evidence is hidden by the government, like one of those. Like he was top notch. And then, you know, I simply gave him don't remember a date or something like that. Oh, well, actually, you know, August 12th of 1926, this was, you know, blah 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 blah. And the way that he turned on me instantaneously, to publicly shame and ridicule and condemn me, and I was going to hell, and I was like, one of my favorites is like when they'll start throwing in the satanic references.
Oh God.
Meanwhile, um, I have absolutely and never have any kind of attachment to any kind of Christian lore.
Yeah.
I'm I don't have anything to do with Satan.
No.
However, that's usually the de facto, and I've been called all kinds of wild things over the years because of it. And it's simply the nature of my study, and the fact that people have this very misinterpreted colloquial idea of this media witch and what a media witch is going to do. And you see it within occult spaces, you see it outside of occult spaces. Meanwhile, insofar as my own personal path and practice, witchcraft is just an element of it's a mindset. It's a mindset. It's not that I'm sitting around, you know, dancing the hokey pokey under the full moon, although that sounds like a good time to me. Um, you know, it's about this accountability, this self-determination, like we had spoken about before.
Yeah.
And it's those kinds of elements that drew me in and keep me in, because that is how I find my grounding. It's how I operate my worldview and find myself within this world. And but you can't explain that to somebody who's sitting there calling you Satan's whore.
Gosh, right, okay. So, I mean, focusing on taking that in a slightly different direction, how do you feel about the mass commodification of the Halloween season and more broadly death-related themes within witchcraft? Because they're not the same thing, but just the mortuary, the connection
There
to
is
spirits of the dead.
a lot of death related themes within witchcraft, and there's even a specific kind of branch of witchcraft that focus exclusively on death, dying, deities that represent these things. And I harken back to what I usually say, it's because it's such a fundamental part of the human experience,
Yes.
right? Not only for the
Yeah.
person who's dying, but for the people who are left behind, you know?
Yes, of
Um,
course.
so being that it's such a fundamental part of the human experience, of course, there's reflections within magical practice. We have, um, the Medi-magical papyrus from ancient Egypt, going over all
Yes.
of the Book of the Dead. There's also a Tibetan Book of the Dead. There's also lots of literature in regards to rituals for the dead and rituals for posthumous dead communication.
Mm.
That's a whole branch of it too, and has been parts of spiritualist spaces since Egypt,
Mm. Mm.
3,000 years before Common Era, where, the idea of like channeling the dead. And so there's a lot of representations of that. And it's all part of, in my opinion, it's all part of the mourning practice, you know?
Mm.
And the mourning practice can take months, it can take years, it can take decades. Somebody can continue on this path of it's almost like a celebratory mourning, but it can take on some
Yeah.
darker turns. When you look at the spiritualist movement of the early 20th century and stuff like that, and people commodifying it and seeking monetary gain from these experiences or whatever they are. Um, Seances. I love seance history. That's a wild ride.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
But you see
And
a lot of representations within various kinds of occult practices, traditional practices, folk practices, and also high ceremonial magic, which is kind of like the bourgeoisie of the
yeah.
magical world. You see it at all levels because it's such a fundamental part of the human experience.
And I suppose a lot of the things that when I think about it in my areas of research, it's framed around dialogues with the dead or protecting the dead from other harms, but
Yeah.
often in the pop culture, it's misunderstood as to do with sort of controlling the dead or in some way. But I think there's it's also it's about caring for the dead. It's part of that mourning, as you say. It's not anything particularly morbid any more than any other religion or spirituality is, but it's an integral part of that trying to control and protect and negotiate unexpected and often untoward relationships. I've been asked to speak at an event for Halloween on the undead, and I'm a bit uncomfortable about it, and I'm not sure how to. I've got an idea of what I'm going to say, but I'm going to try and talk about how concepts of the undead are actually quite ubiquitous because they're just a part of a spectrum of relationships with the dead rather than some strange separate category. But I don't know. I haven't really thought out what I'm going to say, but it's not, it wasn't
And that's
framed.
the
Yeah.
that's the Christian lens. That's the Christian lens in full view, is this idea that communicating with the dead or concepts of the undead or concepts of spirits in general have to have this dark tone.
Mm.
That's the Christian lens. There is
Mm.
no other faith or practice across the globe um, where it is seen as this like dark, macabre, wrong thing to do, to have these kinds of communications with past loved ones or whatever. And I think it goes into, and this is just me supposing off the top of my head kind of thing. My interpretation is much like medicine itself. It was co-opted by the church. All of the medicine women from these small villages were often called witches and all this stuff because the church wanted to have the monopoly. They wanted the monopoly on healing and they wanted the monopoly on death. So any kind of interaction that didn't fall
Yes.
under the control of the church in regards to um, dead ritual, death communication, spirit communication, if it wasn't done by a priest, then it didn't count. Doesn't count. It's evil. It's evil if it's outside of our house. You
Yeah.
have to pay us for the privilege of, you know,
Yes. It's about controlling the revenue streams. Really. Yeah.
it's dreams, and it's about control over every aspect of the human experience.
So I want to ask about, obviously you don't define yourself as an archaeologist of magic or witchcraft, but archaeological evidence must, or places or heritage sites, in terms of have a place. For the UK it tends to be Pendle, and for the US it's Salem, but there are other locations, of course. But we have that. But I mean, I just wondered what if you have any, if you've done any research or any work, or you have any thoughts on the problems or potentials of this kind of material aspect for people latch onto. Uh,
It comes down to the gimmick. It comes down to the gimmick for me, because you have in the UK, there is a witchcraft museum where items of historical significance for path and practice, whether it be ritual tools, altar tools, spell jars, different kinds of carvings, because there is absolutely archaeological evidence throughout history of folk traditional practices. And while we may not always lump them into the category of witchcraft to a degree, you get that umbrella term with what we modern times recognize as a metaphysical kind of component. Um, there's carvings that have been found around door frames,
yes,
as
loads.
symbols of luck, symbols of protection, um, ritual items from Egypt, ritual items from Rome, ritual items from even India is another great example. So we have all of these context clues, and all of those clues are putting together the larger narrative of why these practices were important, who was practicing them, why they were practicing, and how culture has not only evolved and adapted around those things, but how they themselves have evolved and adapted to things that we do almost regularly without
Yeah,
even thinking about it. You wish somebody good luck. You wish somebody good luck. You blow out birthday candles. You make a wish on them. And it's like these things are totally normalized. And it's like, okay, well, why is that normalized, but this isn't? And when we look at sorry, I'm digressing in all kinds of
no,
sorts.
no, no. It's just interesting. It's just interesting. As an archaeologist, I often wonder about what our role is. We have an evidence base that tells the story. I know there's various people who do the archaeology of magic and witchcraft in different regards. There's a doctoral student at my department, actually, as a historian, being supervised on English witchcraft, but she's a practicing witch as well. So there's those interleaving connections in different ways. But it is often, and I know people like Kerry Holbrook who do work on modern sort of popular ritual practices like coin trees, and they have deep roots, but they are largely a phenomenon of the last few decades, and love locks, and sort of nothing I would categorize precisely in that way, but she does talk about them as magic in a sense that people expect some kind of efficacy from them, often not rationalized or fully worked through. And I just often wonder about the parameters of our archaeological contribution.
Yeah, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky also when we look at archaeological evidence, because the primary source for all of these archaeological finds are always the elite, because the poor didn't have the means necessary to have items that could withstand the test of time. A lot of their charms, a lot of their amulets, they were made out of wood, made out of straw, made out of all of these different items. And so we have very few examples of concrete archaeological evidence of some of these practices. Most of them are either written accounts of certain kinds of amulets. We have plenty of those. We have written accounts of different kinds of practices for protection, for grief. And as far as kind of the modern history of witchcraft, a lot of that stuff is either privately owned or discarded. The amount of people that I had to contact throughout my academic career that had private collections of what I would deem as historically significant, but there is no, archaeological body or historical body that's going to be like, yes, those are vital to our story as humans, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we keep in museums, is the stuff that we find vital to the story of humans. But because witchcraft, occultism, esotericism, hermeticism, all of these things are the things that you scoff at now, we don't see any value in them. And so there's only two witchcraft official, like, witchcraft museums. There's one in England and there's one in Italy, and that's it.
It's interesting, isn't it? So there is a heritage to this, but it's a very dispersed, contradictory,
It's
messy.
it's patchwork for sure, and
Mm.
there aren't enough of me's. There's not enough academics that are having a focus on this to track down and find all of these things. And it's a shame, in my opinion.
So what are you going to be doing moving forward then? Whether it's online or with your research, are you able to share anything that you decided you're going to do differently or more of or less of to
I
to
mean,
to face the
yeah,
yeah
it's an ever-changing landscape,
to
right?
do
And
the
it's really,
education? Yeah.
yeah, it's an ever-changing landscape. It's difficult to try and pinpoint exactly where you want to go or how people are going to receive things. So, I mean, most of it's kind of just playing it by ear. Lately, I've been trying to have more experiences going live on TikTok, which has its issues. However, it's been really great connecting on that one-to-one level with people, and people like actively asking me questions. I find that that's a better medium for that. I don't usually get a lot of questions in comment sections, but when people are live, they're like, oh, since you're here, can I ask? And it gets really, that's really exciting for me. So engaging more one-on-one with people is something that I'm going forward. I definitely want to continue. And I mean, it's also beneficial for somebody who's awkward and shy like me to have those kinds of, like,
You
these public-esque
yeah.
speaking engagements, and working on that. I do have another lecture that I'm going to be doing in December at a university out here. I did my first one last year,
Oh yes,
and
I remember. Yeah.
yeah, you gave me some awesome advice, because of course naturally I was overthinking it always.
Yeah, no, I kind of I guessed from what little I knew of your personality that was where
Yeah,
that's where the advice needed to be offered,
hit the
in
nail
that
on the
regard. Yeah.
head. And so in that, I thought, honestly, I was like, oh yeah, well, that'd be cool. Be like 10 people, 15 people. We had 80 people show up, and I was shocked. And so they've asked if I could return and do something again for that, right around kind of like Yule festivals and all of that sort of thing. And then ever present is the work on my publications. Right now, I'm specifically researching occult societies of the 17th, or not 17th, occult societies of the 19th and 20th century. There's a lot of them. That's where you get all of the crazy, wild behavior, and everybody was fighting with everybody, and it becomes, a really fascinating topic. And yeah, moving forward, I just hope to engage in more historical conversations. I
Yeah.
want to remove myself from a lot of the turmoil and the drama and the interpersonal, because I really have rekindled my love with educating. And I think that's the thing I can take away, even if, all of it shut down tomorrow, is it really rekindled my love with educating. And so long as I'm able to do that, I think I'm going to be content.
I wondered if you had any final thoughts for our viewers and listeners regarding how they would learn more. I mean, I hope maybe you could share some links in, or including your social media in the description. But, is there any other words of advice you have or encouragement for those who are, interested in learning more about
Um,
witchcraft history?
if you're interested in witchcraft history, it's always important. There's three main things I say to look out for. And the first one is you got to be careful of your vetting process. Know who these authors are, know what else they've contributed to and written to, because that right-wing pipeline, it sits pretty darn close to a lot of these occult, pagan, etc. topics. So being very mindful of who you're listening to, being very mindful of what you're looking for as well is very important. If you're looking strictly for just history and historical context, there is absolutely authors that are engaging in that kind of work. Owen Davies is a professor that I absolutely adore, and he's
Oh
written a
yes,
few
I'm
books.
mutuals with him on X. Yes,
I,
he does some good.
I,
I only know him from that. Sorry, I confess.
yeah, I adore him. I use one of his books I reference one of his books in my research all the time because it's
Oh
just
yeah.
well put together. So there are other academics who are participating in these spaces. They're few and far between, but they do exist. And then the last thing is just to use not common sense per se, but critical thinking. Always engage with your critical thinking. Um, Never take anyone's opinion as at face value. Make sure that you can prove it yourself and come to your own conclusions. Because it's not always about what, like, the majority of this research, the majority of this knowledge has nothing to do in whether or not you believe in magic, but it has so much more to do with how we operate as humans in society when things are difficult and when things are good. And there's so much beauty to be found in topics like this, and there's so many people that can be represented in ways that they aren't in
Yes,
any other aspect.
absolutely. And that's the point, isn't it? Is that it's not about faith or necessarily practice. It can be, but it's about those broader themes of being human that this takes us on a journey through. I think that's the thing I've learned anyway. And I'm still learning, as we all are, and I keep coming across things and go, oh, that links to that. And so it's a joy to follow you and learn things, as well as just have the dialogue. And I hope that following this, others will follow you and use you as a route to get into this exciting topic and field. But thank you, Saraphima. It's been really, really great to chat. And as unless you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom for our viewers, or is other than go learn about it, you lot. I don't know.
Get out there. No, no, not particularly. I just want to take the opportunity to say, like, thank you for having me on, and thank you for having this discussion with me. And it's always important to hear a variety of different views on a lot of these more like taboo-esque topics. And I just hope that I did it justice. Honestly, I hope I did it justice, and I hope I did my field a bit of good, and people can kind of take away from this that there is so much complexity and nuance and beauty in topics like this that you never shy away from them.
Follow Archeo Death on YouTube, TikTok, WordPress, and a host of other social media.